Hello, this is Donna Laquadera Carr, and I'm from Dodge Data and Analytics. I'm really pleased to welcome everyone today to our Building a Safety Culture webinar. We have done a recent study in partnership with CPWR, United Rentals, and with additional support from Autodesk, ClickSafety, Procore, PCL, and NIBS, and we're really pleased to bring these findings to you. We really think that this idea of a safety culture is really transforming the construction industry. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the report, a little bit about me first though. I am the Industry Insights Research Director here at Dodge Data and Analytics. I work on the SmartMarket reports, which I'll get into in a second. But what we're going to cover today is we're going to look first at the safety culture indicators and give you a sense of how we created a safety culture spectrum that we could then use to look at the rest of the findings. And through that lens of the safety culture spectrum, we'll look at the types of safety practices we currently see implemented in the industry, the impact of safety practices and programs on business. We'll look at influence factors that are encouraging people to invest in greater safety programs, really do more work in their companies on this area. And then finally, we'll look at some trends in terms of training practices and communications. So as I mentioned, I work in the SmartMarket Report division. I'm actually the managing editor on the SmartMarket Report series. You can just see a group of different types of reports that we do here. We tend to cover three basic areas on our reports. We tend to look at sustainability. We tend to look at practices and processes, which is where the safety report falls, and we look at technology trends. And we really think, though, that all three of these things are interwoven together, and it really is the way sustainability and technology are influencing practices and processes that is really transforming the industry. So we think this safety report is a key part of that. And you can see that there is a website listed on this page, analyticsstore.construction.com. Our partners are so critical to these studies because they help fund them. And that allows us to bring the data to the industry for free. So any of the reports that we've covered, from the Global Green Report to our new health report, Designing for Health report, to lean construction, to the managing uncertainty, to this safety report, all of them are available for free download. So this study is actually the follow-up to a report that we did back in 2012. Again, we partnered with CPWR. ClickSafety was an important partner on that one, and United Rentals was as well. It really looked at and set a baseline for safety management practices in the industry. This current study, we landed up with 264 survey respondents, so we had a pretty robust survey sample. You can see that it's pretty evenly split between general contractors and trade contractors, and that we also had a few design-build contractors, construction management firms, and one engineering firm. Now, as we go forward, there will be, on occasion, some analysis referred to based on a split between general contractors and specialty contractors. And I just want to let you know, when it comes to that, the general contractor grouping includes the design-build contractors and the construction management firms listed here, and the specialty contractors includes the engineering firm. We also had a very good range of different size firms for this study, and that also allows us to look at what larger firms are doing compared to what smaller firms are doing, and we do see some major differences in this area. So I'm looking forward to sharing those differences with you. So our goal on the current study was twofold. First, we certainly wanted to take the baseline that we'd created in 2012 and see how far things had shifted. And it's a really interesting comparison, of course, right now in the industry to go from what was happening in 2012 to now, because the market has changed so much. 2012, we were just beginning to emerge from the recession, and now we have a relatively robust construction market. So seeing how safety has evolved during that important transition is critical. In addition to that, we had one major new area of inquiry, and that is to quantify a safety culture, and from that to create a safety culture spectrum that we could use to see how this attention on safety culture that has arisen in the last few years in the industry is helping to transform firms' approach to safety. So I will just be focusing on data in this particular presentation, on the actual results of the study that we did. However, I do want to make it clear that the SmartMarket report has a lot of interesting information beyond just the data. It's a full 56 pages long. In addition to the data analysis and commentary, you can see we have a lot of special features. One that's not mentioned here, but I think is critical, is that there is a feature that focuses on the difference between a safety culture and a safety climate. In addition to that, there's other interesting topics covered like wearable devices on job sites and how that's changing safety, about how lean project delivery has a huge impact on safety, on the kind of technologies that are supporting safety advances. I hope you all do go to analyticsstore.construction.com and download the report, because this is going to give you a good sense of what the top findings are, but it really doesn't cover the full breadth of the report. All right, with that said, let's dive into the meat of our discussion. And the first part we're going to really focus on is that idea of a safety culture, of a culture where safety is a top concern, not only from the bottom down, but from the top up. We relied in our work on a safety culture in this report on CPWR's previous work in establishing some of the key indicators that demonstrate that the potential that a safety culture is in place at an organization. Those indicators, they had 33 indicators total, and they each fell into overall they fell into 7 categories. You can see the categories listed here. I'm not going to read through this list now because we're going to go through every one in detail. But I want to give you a sense of where we're going with this. So we have 33 total indicators. There are 26 where the activity can actually be measured in terms of the degree of involvement of a firm in the activity indicated in the indicator. And you'll see those. This will become more clear as we move forward. But we asked people to say, are you doing it on most of your projects, more than 70%? Are you doing it at a moderate level of your projects, or to a moderate degree in your firm from 25 to 70%? Or are you doing things at a very low rate? You actually have some activity going on in this area, but it's not firm-wide, which is less than 25%. And we use the responses on this to calculate our safety culture for those 26 indicators. Only things that landed up in the high level were included in the safety culture calculation, in the number of points people received and the number of indicators it was indicated that they were involved in. For the other categories, for the other categories, it was just a simple yes or no. Are you doing this? Is this something your firm has adopted or not? So when it comes to the first category, that is management commitment to safety and health. And this will give you a good sense of the different types of indicators. There were 8 indicators overall in this category. 3 of them fell simply into that yes-no category. And you can see, you are either including safety and health as part of your strategic planning or you're not. Your company either has a joint worker management safety and health committee or it doesn't. It's fundamentally a yes or no, not to what degree are you really engaged with this. So for each of these, you can see that engagement for formal processes for safety-related corrective action is relatively high, with nearly 2/3 participating. But it drops off a bit when they consider whether or not safety and health is part of strategic planning. And in fact, less than half of the companies that participated reported that their company had a joint worker management safety and health committee. That is clearly an area for growth in the industry. So in addition, we had these other 5 indicators, but these all allowed us to measure the degree of involvement. So let's look at the first two first. Safety and health is a top agenda item at meetings, and clearly defined health and safety, having clearly defined health and safety expectations. You can see that nearly everyone in the pie says, yes, we're doing this to a certain degree. But when we also ask them, well, how often are you doing it? Now, for these first two ones, you can see that especially for having clearly defined health and safety expectations, that most people felt the expectations at their company, the majority of them, were pretty well defined. Well over half said that over 70% of those expectations are very, very well defined. When it comes to safety and health being a top agenda item at meetings, we still have more people reporting that high level than at the moderate and low level, but it is slightly below 50%, which does suggest that, again, there's a lot of room for more companies to get more deeply engaged in this. All of them seem to be pretty much familiar with it, but there's a question about getting more deeply engaged. When it comes to the other three, we start seeing things drop off a little. You can see that the management participation in safety and health meetings at job sites, you do have 90% saying, yeah, we're doing this to some degree. But we start really seeing go significantly below half who are doing this on most of their projects. And when it comes to practicing prevention through design and safety and health data used for improvement, there we see a significant number are not doing this most of the time. And we really see the opportunity for more companies to consider this. And one thing I want to say as we keep going through these is I hope that all of you are looking at this with an eye to what is my company doing, right? Because that's one of the nice things about this study is that it really benchmarks a lot of these activities and the degree to which they're practiced in the industry, and you can really gauge where your company would fall on our safety culture spectrum just by seeing how actively engaged you are in each of these activities. So our second major category is the recognition of safety and health as fundamental company values. And you can see that valuing safety and health at least as much as productivity is pretty common. Over 80% are reporting that, yes, that is true of their company. We see a much lower percentage saying that actually having safety and health participation recognized and rewarded is equally popular. And when it comes to the ones that can actually be more deeply measured, encouraging safety and health mentoring, again, relatively common in terms of are you doing it at all, slightly less common, still less than half, although the high is the biggest category for those who really are doing it most of the time. Factoring safety and health into planning and bidding is the least common one. Again, a lot of people are doing it a little bit, but only 39% are doing it as a regular practice on most of their projects. So the next big category is accountability for safety and health on projects. And you can see why this would be critical, right? If you want to have a safety culture where everyone is responsible, you need that management attention, you need that focus, you need your company to be clearly defining its message, but you also definitely need to be holding people accountable and tracking what's going on. So, and you can see that holding everyone accountable for safety is one of the top performing indicators of all of the ones included in the study. Nearly everyone says to a certain degree that happens at their company, and over 70% report that it happens most of the time on most of their projects. Near misses being taken seriously investigated, again, very common practice. Most firms are doing this, but we do see a bit of a drop-off, although 60% doing it at a high level is still a pretty popular practice. When it comes to using external safety and health audits, though, the number that are even doing it drops down to 74%, and you can see that we are below half in those that are doing it quite frequently. All right, so we've talked about, sort of the company's vision, how they're communicating about it. whether everyone is sort of engaged by it. Now, to what degree are you really engaging the job site workers specifically? And we're going to find that this is an important finding throughout the study. I'm going to be coming back to the idea of getting job site workers involved to safety again. But for now, just as an indicator of a safety culture, we can see that, again, one of the most popular and widely used indicators of a safety culture is that workers are encouraged to report unsafe conditions. There really is almost no one who participated in the study who didn't feel their firm was doing it to a certain degree, and over 70% feel it's a pretty common practice. Workers being encouraged to report near misses, again, nearly everyone in the study is doing that, and you've got well over 60% reporting that it's a common practice. So there's room for improvement, but still, this is still pretty widespread industry-wide. Workers asked for input on site safety and health conditions, again, almost universally doing it to a certain degree, but here we see a bit of a drop-off where there's less than half report that they're doing it on most of their projects. There are a few other options in this category as well. We see that it's still pretty common to have some experience with giving workers stop work authority, with involving workers in safety and health planning, and with getting workers involved in job hazard analysis. But as you can see, while we're still above half who say, yes, we do this, we give workers stop work authority on most of our projects, it's really a very different picture for involving workers in safety and health planning and in job hazard analysis. This idea of getting the workers involved earlier and giving them a bigger role is clearly a growth area, and we'll see that the study findings do support the idea that this would be a great idea. And in particular, I want you to remember that one about getting involved in job hazard analysis. All right, it's not just important that the workers do it, though, right? It's important that the supervisors set the tone, that the supervisors make sure and reinforce that the safety messages are reaching the job site and reinforce their impact. And we can see that that is pretty widely recognized in the industry. Certainly, supervisors leading by example, again, one of the top indicators. Most people feel like this is going on some of their projects, and a good 2/3 think it's going on most of their projects. On the other hand, subcontractors monitored for safety practices. While a high percentage are doing it on at least some of their projects, you can see that it's just a little bit over half who say that most of their leadership is doing it. And when it comes to mentoring subcontractors on safety practices, we see that there's a good 20% who are not doing this at all. And even among those who are doing it, it's not that common for it to be done by most of the leadership. This is one of the examples. There are a couple of others where it's not so much something that's being done on a company-wide level, but appears to vary from leader to leader, which would lead to this kind of result. All right, so it's critical, of course, to not just have your safety expectations clearly defined, but to really be able to communicate those effectively. And this is definitely one of those categories where we have both those things that you're either doing or not doing, and you have things that you're doing to a higher degree. So amongst the things that you're either doing or not doing, we can see that most of the industry is communicating their safety and health policies clearly to their employees. But that slightly fewer are communicating their safety and health policies consistently. And you can see that while most companies have pretty good experience with managers engaging with workers one-on-one, less than 50% say that most of their managers are doing it. This is, again, another category where it appears some managers are really taking a leadership role in this, and others are not. And when it comes to safety and health policies coordinated with all subcontractors, we see that it's a pretty significant percentage, 85%, that say there's some activity going on with this. And we do see that more than half are saying that they're doing it at a high level, but there is still definitely room for growth in that area as well. Finally, we get to owner involvement in safety and health. This is just one quick note. This refers to the company owner, not the project owner. And this appears to be the biggest category overall for improvement. You can see that the pies do not go above 90% on any of these categories, and especially when it comes to how actively involved each of these companies are in these activities, none of them exceed 50%. Everyone is below. So there's a lot of room for the industry to see more commitment from owners in terms of monitoring on-site safety and health performance, in terms of participating in safety and health activities, in terms of supporting safety and health audits, in terms of requiring safety and health pre-certification of all bidders, and in terms of providing incentives for safety and health performance. All right, so that is our list of indicators. Again, what we did is we said, all right, so how many people are just doing the ones that are yes and no? And how many are really doing the other activities at a high level in their company? And we took those together, added them up, and came up with our safety culture spectrum. And that spectrum consisted of very high likelihood that you have a strong safety culture because you're high on the level of indicators, a moderate on the level of indicators where there's a lot of room for some growth, and then some low on the level of indicators. And interestingly, when we divided it out with 20 or more indicators being high, 12 to 19 indicators being a moderate, and 10 indicators or less being low, we can see that the industry divides up pretty evenly into these three categories. And when you look at the difference between general and specialty contractors, you see that there isn't much. That there's a little bit of shifting back and forth between these columns, but these distributions are very similar, especially when you consider how different the distributions are when you start looking at it by size of firms. That it's very clear that very large firms, those with 500 and more employees, are much more likely to be at the high end of the safety culture spectrum, and those with fewer than 100 employees are much more likely to be at the low end of the safety culture spectrum. Now, some of this does have to do with the fact that a larger company is more likely to have specific policies in place, and a lot of this is very policy focused. But nonetheless, even when taking that into account, this is certainly a compelling finding. Now, we would love to be able and hope to be able to repeat this now that we have a benchmark for this at level of safety culture activity, to repeat this every 2 years to track industry progress against this rating. You're going to see that the findings clearly reveal that having a safety culture makes your company much more able to really garner the benefits of your safety investments much more clearly, makes you more likely to recognize the need for safety investments, makes you more likely to do a lot more activities across the board. So this idea of seeing how the degree to which the industry is being successful and encouraging adoption of a safety culture could be critical in terms of really moving the needle on our performance on safety in this industry. All right, so that's the safety culture indicators. Let's look at the types of safety practices. Now we're going to get into the data that was previously covered to a certain degree in the last report and looking at the one now. So practices used on projects to promote safety came into a lot of different categories. We had quite a few different items. So you can see that safety policies was one of them. And the most common safety policies were developing site-specific safety and health plans and establishing site-specific training programs for supervisors, workers, and specialty contractors. On the other hand, offering safety incentives, not as common in the industry. When it comes to safety practices that involve PPE, you can see that these are very common, that most companies enforce the use of PPE and provide functional PPE. And that a pretty healthy percentage, above 70%, do have people inspecting PPE for functionality prior to use. When it comes to organizational safety practices, we see a bit of a range. The highest percentage by far, 93%, do think that their company maintains an open door policy for workers. But we also see pretty high levels of people who say, yes, we're including job site workers in the safety process, and we're designating competent safety personnel. We see a bit of a drop-off then, with just 2/3 saying that they conduct job hazard analysis, job safety analysis before construction begins. And remember that one, that is a bit lower, that is something that the industry really has room to improve on. We also see about the same level of doing prompt and thorough near-miss and incident investigations. And it's far less common. Less than 50% report that prevention through design is going on in their projects. Finally, there's safety practices involving equipment. And again, like those involving PPE, we see these as pretty common, that inspecting equipment for functionality prior to use and installing safety practices are relatively common practices. Now, that's interesting, but what's really good to know is if you're not doing all of these, which ones are the ones you really need to do? So after we asked everyone, well, what are you doing? We gave them that list back of what they said they were doing. And we said, okay, please rank the first, second, and third most effective practices that you are currently engaged in. This chart, the darker color on the left of the bar is just those people who said, yes, this ranks first. The lighter color bar, the lighter color extension is those who ranked it second or third. Now you saw how many practices there are, a lot, and you saw how many of them were done by 70% or more, so most people had a pretty healthy list to choose from when they were doing these three. So you can see that enforcing the use of PPE is by far the number one. It's ranked first by the most, and when you consider the top three ranking, it's also the highest. You also see a pretty high ranking for conducting job hazard analysis and job safety analysis. Now that's really interesting because remember, there is not a high percentage compared to some of the other practices that are engaging in this. So this appears to be, according to the study findings, a key area for growth. The other options are, again, often those that are widely adopted, and they're widely adopted for a reason because they are considered quite effective by the industry. So next we're going to look at the aspects of a world-class safety program. We first asked about this in 2012 because, in some ways it's asking people what they aspire to. Excuse me. And, and we saw some very interesting differences between, for the most part, when we asked this in 2015, most people thought that the things that were important, they thought were important in 2012, were important in 2015. Things like strong safety leadership ability in supervisors and holding regular safety meetings with job site workers and supervisors and ongoing access to safety training for job site workers and supervisors. All of these pretty widely recognized before, pretty widely recognized now. But where the big leap is in job site worker involvement. When we first asked this, there are actually over 10 of these options. This is just the top findings for this question. When we had asked this before in 2012, job site worker involvement was somewhere in the middle. A lot of people, 66% thought it was important, but it certainly wasn't recognized as critical as high a percentage as many of the other factors we asked about. Now, 85% say it is one of the essential aspects of a world-class safety program. That is an enormous shift. It moves it to the top of the line. It has the highest percentage who recognize its importance. And we see that this shift carries through. In fact, one of the ones I did mention, it's relatively close, but there is still the only other notably significant difference is that ongoing access to safety training for supervisors and job site workers, which might benefit from this greater recognition of job site worker involvement in safety in general. All right, so let's look at some interesting differences when it comes to this. Again, remember, we set up that spectrum, that high end of the spectrum for safety culture and that low end of the spectrum for safety culture. One of the things you can clearly see that's unambiguous in our findings is that those who are at the high end of the safety culture spectrum really recognize a lot more features as essential to a world-class safety program. In fact, nearly all of them recognize the top 5. Job site worker involvement, strong safety leadership abilities and supervisors, ongoing access to safety training, hazard assessment and safety plans, which again, remember, was one of the important things that, one of the most important practices in terms of its total effectiveness. Regular job site meetings with job site workers and supervisors. All of these are something that those at the high end, those who are likely to have a very strong safety culture, really say, yes, this is something that we think is critical. And those who are not as engaged in a safety culture, those at the low end, are far less likely to recognize all of these as really critically important. All right, so that is the types of safety practices. Now that we've established what people are doing, let's look at the impact of those practices and programs on their businesses. And again, this is something that we first benchmarked in 2012. So it's really interesting to see how things have changed. Now in 2012, the clear and top finding was that, any lingering doubts about the idea that really spending time and energy on safety takes anything away from project schedule and project budget was really put to rest. You can see people were asked to rate on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 and 4 were both highly positive and positive impacts. 3 was a neutral position, and 2 and 1 were slightly negative to highly negative impacts. And you can see that in 2012, there was already a huge gap. Quite a few saw a positive impact on project budget, and almost no one saw a negative impact. But now, in 2015, you can see that that has increased by 4%, that people are, that those on the positive side have grown quite a bit, and we see the same thing when it comes to project schedule. We actually see people who are investing more in safety reporting these better engagements. And again, there's almost no one now. Those who saw a negative impact from their safety investments actually dropped from 13 to 10%. So in addition to that 4% lift in those on the positive side, we had a 3% drop in those on the negative side. So these are just becoming more well established. When it comes to project ROI, something's really going on. We can see that something is moving the needle in the industry, because quite a few more of those who participate in the study, a full 7% more, are saying they're seeing positive impacts on their project ROI from their safety investments. It's probably the combination of those who are seeing improvements on project budget and improvements on project schedule, quite frankly. And then when it comes to just, reducing reportable injuries, we see even more saying that there's a huge positive lift right now. Now, you would expect that number to be high. It was very high at 71% back in 2012, but that leap up to 81% suggests that the industry is making progress, and that progress is paying off. So so when we looked at this, we didn't just say, well, are you getting positive or are you getting negative? Once we found out where they fell, we said, okay, you said you're experiencing a positive impact on budget or on schedule. What degree of improvement have you seen? Now, you can see that when it comes to budget, most of them land in the middle category. That is by far the highest percentage. And the only other percentage that competes with that are those who say they really don't know, that they're not sure of the impact, the exact specific percentage impact of their safety investments on budget. When it comes to that, the how much of a schedule improvement, again, the biggest category falls in that 1 to 5%. Again, we even get a slightly bigger group who really just don't know. But we do see that very healthy 23%, nearly a quarter, who are seeing more than a 5% lift based on their investments in safety that are as an impact on schedule. So, certainly that number is pretty strong. And when we look at the impact of their safety investments on project ROI, again, by far the largest grouping falls in that 1 to 5%. And interestingly, a slightly lower percentage don't know this than don't know its impact on schedule. So they are keeping a track of how their safety investments are impacting their project ROI. When we look at the impact of safety on injury rates, there we see some relatively impressive numbers where you have nearly half are saying that they see their injury rates decrease by more than 5% because of their recent safety investments. All right, so but we do recognize that beyond the quantifiable measures of safety, there are definitely things that are huge benefits to firms that really pay off as business benefits, but that do not necessarily lend themselves to being purely quantified. So for those, we just ask people to identify whether they saw a positive impact for safety on all of these. And we can see that there was significant growth between 2012 and 2015 in terms of safety having a positive impact on companies' ability to contract new work. We see a slight growth in project quality. We see a huge growth in staff retention and a slight growth in the ability to attract new staff. And those last two, that idea of staff, right now, other studies that we're doing definitely demonstrate that the worker that finding skilled workers in the industry is a huge challenge that most people are facing. So as that grows to be a more prominent issue for companies, this idea of staff retention and the ability to attract new staff really is going to gain importance. And there is no doubt that companies with a strong safety reputation are in a better position to recruit. So the same question again, I wanted to examine it from the perspective of general contractors versus specialty contractors. And you can see that general contractors are clearly seeing much bigger benefits from their safety investments than the trade contractors. That most general contractors report that their standing in the industry has improved and their ability to contract new work has improved. Over half are seeing project schedule improvements and project budget improvements, and well over half are reporting the ability to attract new staff. Over 2/3 are able to retain their staff better. Okay, now again, I want to return to this idea of being in the high end of the safety culture spectrum versus the low end of the safety culture spectrum. And in some ways, I think this is the most important slide from all the findings in this particular study. Because clearly, if you have that safety culture informing your entire organization and really driving activities from the top down and from the bottom up, it makes an enormous difference in terms of the impact that you see from your safety investments. You can see that it is pretty much common for those who fall in this high end of the spectrum, who really do seem to embody a strong safety culture, to experience improved project quality. Again, to have stronger ability to contract new work, to improve their standing in the industries, to lower their reportable injuries, to have job site workers actually truly feel comfortable in reporting unsafe conditions. All of these are common. And when it comes to the rest, we can see that it's much, much more common for those at the high end of the safety culture spectrum to experience these benefits than those at the low end of the safety culture spectrum. All right, so what are the top success factors, though? We've seen so many. That was a big, long list. And certainly where we see the differences really between the high end of the spectrum and the low end of the spectrum is certainly that willingness to report unsafe conditions. If you know you have a true safety culture, you know there's no penalty attached with that. Project quality sees an enormous lift, staff retention, ROI, and the ability to attract new staff. All right, so that is the impact on business. We've seen how powerful it is. So what is going to encourage the industry to do more with safety? What will influence, what will continue to move the needle and continue to increase investments, not just in money, but in time, in resources, in safety? And one of the things that really determines that is who are the most influential people or positions for improving safety. Now, this is similar to one of the previous charts we looked at, where we asked them to rank them by first, second, and third in terms of the functions that they think are the most influential. And the darker color part of the bar represents all of those who ranked first, and then the lighter part of the bar represents those who ranked second or third. And here, I think that breaking that analysis apart and being able to see both is really important. Because if you're just looking at what are the most ranked most frequently in the top three, then it's clear that company leadership and job site workers leap to the top, with the project management team closely behind. However, number one that's ranked first is actually the construction company owners. And what this seems to suggest is that when you have strong leadership among the company's owners, that is the most impactful thing. But it isn't the only thing. It isn't absolutely essential. You certainly need it in the leadership. You certainly need it amongst the job site workers. You certainly need it amongst the project management team. But if the owners are engaged, it makes an enormous difference. So, I mean, this should be a clarion call to owners out there that the way they present safety in their company and the way they work to support and endorse the safety culture in their companies really can be extraordinarily influential. All right, so when we look at the actual drivers that encouraged companies up till now to adopt their current safety management practices, we can see that for a lot of these categories, they're very similar to what they said in 2012. That the needle hasn't moved that much, that for the most part these differences are not statistically significant. However, there are two areas where we see a really pretty notable decline from what was influential in 2012 to what is influential in 2015. And that is regulatory requirements and owner and client demand. And what this appears to suggest is that companies are relying a little bit less on external factors influencing their decisions to adopt safety management practices, that it is coming more from an internal desire to improve safety. When we look at the same question in terms of those at the high and low end of the safety culture, I think you're getting used to these charts by now. It is pretty clear that those who are have made the decision to adopt a safety culture have done so because they're influenced by a variety of areas, including those externals. You can see that those are also more important. But things like competitive advantage, what an extraordinary difference. 70% of those who have a safety, at the high end of the safety culture spectrum say, yeah, competitive advantage is a big factor in why we've adopted our current safety management practices. But less than a quarter of those on the low end feel the same way. So it's really a recognition of some of these benefits that is pulling things through. The other one that I want to point to that again has that kind of extraordinary gap is industry leadership and overall safety culture. And again, I guess it's not surprising that those that have a strong safety culture say yes. Nearly all of us think that this was a really important factor that influenced us to do this, whereas almost none of them on the low end of the safety culture spectrum really consider that influential. All right, so that's what encouraged them to adopt their current practices. What will encourage them now to take things even further, to look at some of the data, for instance, in this study and say, we're really strong in this area, but there's a lot of stuff over here in these categories, especially among some of the safety culture indicators, where we could really improve. Well, what will encourage it most, and what was the top finding from the previous study as well, is reduced insurance rates. That appears to be what most of the industry thinks will move the needle. Surprisingly, we see a slight drop-off in those who feel increased owner and client requirements would be influential. That I find a little bit surprising overall. Again, when it comes to the safety, the differential along the safety culture spectrum, you can see that increasing owner requirements, 74% of those on the high end of the safety culture spectrum say, yes, this is really going to be influential for me. But so is data. More data on the positive financial impact of improving safety. The more I can demonstrate the positive bottom line, the more I can do about it. And then finally, wider adoption of risk analysis. There's a lot wider recognition that this could really help encourage future investment in safety management practices. A much higher recognition among those at the high end of the safety culture spectrum than on the low end. All right, our final section is on training practices and communication. And you can see that when it comes to training, safety training availability and requirements, we did the same setup, so you're familiar now by this point with these types of charts. You can see that it's very common industry practice for safety and health training to be provided for supervisors and job site workers. It's also relatively common industry practices for all employees to receive orientation training when starting work on a new site. However, it's a little bit less common for job site workers to get to be required to have basic safety and health training. We also looked at what's going on with online training. Now, we were a little bit surprised to see how flat the study was between 2013 and 2015. That, pretty much people said 2 years ago we were doing about the same level of online training that we are now. There's a slight pickup, but it's tiny. However, when it comes to 2017, suddenly we see a huge lift. There is still, despite the low level of movement in the last 2 years, there is still an expectation in the industry that online training is going to become more widely adopted. And that is no doubt due to the improvements people are seeing in the kind of technologies that can deliver that training. When it comes to, well, who benefits the most from safety training? Where is the biggest impact if I'm doing safety training? You can see that the findings were, for the most part, relatively consistent with 2012, but there were some interesting differences. Certainly there's wide recognition that across both studies that supervisors and the project management team are really important. But when it comes to a safety culture, remember, you want to do it from below and above. And those at the bottom of the pyramid, the supporting members of the pyramid, the job site workers, we did see a notable increase of 6% in those who felt that there was a big impact in providing safety training to that group. We also saw quite a bit of a lift in company leadership. 11% thought that it's really kind of critical that safety training would have a big impact on their company leadership. And then we even saw a lift among estimators. So you can see that there's a movement away from just this idea that project managers and supervisors need to sort of lead the industry, lead their organizations into being safer. That there's more of a recognition that everyone in the company contributes to safety. And where are they getting that safety training? A lot of it's going on the job site. And that was true, that was considered most valuable in 2012. It's considered even more valuable in 2015. But we do see a drop-off in most of the other categories, especially in classroom training, for job site workers. For supervisors, though, we do still see a pretty strong rating for OSHA, authorized OSHA outreach trainers and classrooms as critical ways to deliver safety training. And when it comes to the frequency of safety training by company size, I'm not going to go through all the details on this chart because I think you can get the overall picture that those large companies, those with 500 or more employees, are much more likely to offer safety training more frequently than smaller companies, even when it comes to those with between 10 and 499 employees, but especially when it comes to those with less than 10 employees. You can see that having a company in-house training expert is by far the most common way to deliver training. Third-party trainers is less common now than it was in 2012. There is a slight lift, but it's still pretty low percentage overall for joint labor management training funds. And this slide is very clear. When it comes to the most effective means of communicating safety messages, it is pretty clear that those personal touches, like toolbox talks, are much more critical than other than more distant methods, like email alerts. And then finally, my final data point is that supervisors requesting leadership, that most would prefer that their supervisors could request leadership training as an elective as part of the OSHA 30-hour training. So we are seeing some recognition that leadership training among supervisors is a critical way to promote safety, and that is something that is pretty widely recognized in the industry. All right, so that concludes our presentation. I know we only have about 5 minutes. I don't think we have that much time for questions. The one question that was raised in the notices is someone raised the point that they were told that OSHA frowns on safety incentives. And if you go into the report, there is a more thorough discussion of safety incentives because it depends. Safety incentives are tricky. You can easily incentivize the wrong behavior. And we do discuss why that is probably a good reason why that is a lower performing category. There are some people who find that they're able to do it productively, but it's something that has to be done with great care. If you incentivize safety in the wrong way, what ends up happening is that people become less likely to report near-miss incidents or other things that they think will interfere with them getting that incentive at the end of the day. So you have to make sure that the environment that you're creating with that safety incentive does not actually reduce reporting. So it's a great point, and I'm glad it was raised. But I don't see any other questions, so since we're so close to the time, thank you for your patience. I'm sorry about the late start. And, we have more research going on right now that we'll be delivering to you over the next few months, so I look forward to speaking to you all again, and thank you very much.